And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I'm talking about 10 cards that I missed from last year. I made a video already last year at the end of the year talking about cards that I had missed, and I'm finding more as every day goes by. Typically when I'm doing research for my own decks or, decks for my patrons or decks for my channel, that's when I will come across these cards and I'm like, oh man, that came out last year? That's pretty darn good. And I just, you miss it. There's so many cards coming out now. Even as someone who kind of does this for a living, it can be difficult to catch them all, right? So I have compiled another list of cards that came out last year that I think are definitely worth taking note of. However, I'm going to start out with a card that actually came out this year. It just came out in the last set, Murders of Karlov Manor, that I was going to talk about, and it somehow got bumped. I think it's a pretty darn good card. Unyielding Gatekeeper, 1 and a white, Elephant Cleric 3/2, has the disguise abilities. So, of course, that means you play it face down for 3 as a 2/2 creature, but it has ward 2, and then you can flip it up for the disguise cost, which is just 1 and a white. When Unyielding Gatekeepers turn face up, exile another target non-land permanent. If you controlled it, return it to the battlefield tapped. Otherwise, its controller creates a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. And I grabbed 2 copies of this card for myself because I knew I had at least one deck that I wanted to put it in. Maybe another one. It is obviously white removal, which we have so much fantastic white removal, and even in this set we got really good white removal. This though is doing double duty because obviously you can blink your creatures as well. So if I had, and I don't, but if I had a white blinking deck, I definitely would find room for this because I can flip it up to blink one of my creatures. Or obviously I can use it as removal as well. You're exiling another target non-land permanent. That's pretty darn good. Doesn't hit lands, but hits everything else. Its controller's going to get a 2/2 white detective. Who cares, right? We all know that's no big deal. I know people will probably say this is 5 mana to remove something, which isn't very good. It really isn't, okay? Because in the moment, right, when you're talking about removal, we're in the moment where I got to get that thing off the table. In that moment, you're only paying 2 mana, which is fantastic. The fact that you had to pay 3 mana beforehand, okay, but it's a temporary discount. You're paying the 3 mana way earlier, likely, so you don't have to pay 5 mana in that moment to remove that permanent. You're only paying the 2, and that's pretty darn good. I think this is a pretty great card. A lot of removal on this list as it happens, and Kitesail Larcenist is technically removal in a pretty interesting one. 2 and a blue human pirate, 2/3, flying ward 1. When Kitesail Larcenist enters the battlefield, for each player, choose up to 1 other target artifact or creature that player controls. For as long as Kitesail Larcenist remains on the battlefield, the chosen permanents become treasure artifacts with tap, sacrifice, add 1 mana any color, of course, like a treasure does, and lose all other abilities. Hey, that's pretty good, right? This is a pretty darn good, it's not removal, but it is a dealing with my problems kind of card that I really like cards like that in the commander format. This can hit any artifact or creature, which is pretty darn good. I would say blue deals with creatures pretty well. Artifacts, not so much. So maybe you want to use it for that reason. It's a neat card. It turns the artifacts or creatures into treasure tokens. You can use it on yourself too, right? So there is that. I don't know if you're ever going to want to do that, but you could turn a useless artifact you have into a treasure if you need a ramp really, really badly for whatever reason. But this will just turn off, shut off essentially one of their best artifacts or creatures for as long as this guy remains on the battlefield. Pretty neat card. Woodland Acolyte from Wilds of Eldraine. I think most of the cards on this list are actually from Wilds of Eldraine. I missed a bunch of cards from that set. Lost Caverns of Ixalan has a couple on this list as well. This is a pretty neat card. It's not going to blow anyone away, but I think it is definitely a card that, if you can find room in your deck, you're never going to be sad to see it. So, and it's an adventure card. And the adventure side, meld the wilds, 1 green, mana, instant adventure, put target permanent card from your graveyard on top of your library. So it is that reclaim type of effect only for permanents, but that covers a lot. So, you're always going to want to do that. Every commander game, you're going to want to do that. Then this guy goes into exile and you can cast it later for its adventure side. 2 and a white, human cleric, 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. right? It's not, again, not blowing anybody away, but this just seems like a really great value-y card to me. I think I might throw it in one of my white-green decks, likely my Malira deck, because I have Painter's Servant and a lot of really important permanents in that deck that I want to get back. So the green side, the adventure side, right, I really actually want. And then later, I just get a 2/2 blocker that draws me a card when it ETBs. Seems like pretty good value. Scalding Viper, another really great adventure card from Wilds of Eldraine. The adventure side, Steam Clean, 1 and a blue, a sorcery, adventure, return target non-land permanent to owner's hand. Again, that's something you always want to be doing in every Commander game. And even if you don't want that side, even if for whatever reason you want the other side, turn 2, I can just bounce something to someone's hand and slow them down a little bit, even if it's not that important. Seems pretty good, right? That's always going to be usable. Then it goes into exile, and then I can cast the other side, 1 and a red, elemental snake, 2/1. Whenever an opponent casts a spell with mana value 3 or less, it deals 1 damage to that player. Pretty good, right? We already have lots of effects like this in the Commander format, but geez, this might be the only one I'm aware of that only hits your opponents. Usually these effects hit everybody, right? There's no downside here. It's all upside. I'm just going to eat away at your opponent's life total. Can be extra good, obviously, in certain situations. Again, I don't know if there's a particular deck where this is a slam dunk. I think it's just a good, solid card in any Commander game because both sides are going to be very useful for you. Moving on to Abstruse Archaic. 4 mana avatar, 3/4. Vigilance, pay 1, tap, copy target activated or triggered ability you control from a colorless source. You may choose new targets for the copy. So I believe I did talk about this card last year when Commander Legends came out. However, I'm giving it a revisit. Obviously, and the place where everyone is going to play this is in their colorless decks, right? It's going to go in your colorless decks because it can copy all your colorless stuff. However, I really think you should give consideration for this card in decks that aren't colorless, because an activated or triggered ability from a colorless source covers a lot. And the big one is lands. Of course, lands are colorless. Most people might not think of it that way, but it is a colorless source, a land. And there's a lot of great activated abilities. Obviously, mana abilities don't count. It even says that on the card, but there's a lot of great activated abilities that can be copied with this. I mean, just a Ghost Quarter. That's an activated ability from a colorless source. I pay an extra 1. Now I get to destroy 2 lands, right? Any of those, Wasteland, any of those. I ended up throwing this in my Sophina deck, which is a red-white lands deck, because I have a lot of lands that are doing stuff, a lot of utility lands in that deck. And this can get me a lot of added value in that deck. Just take a look at your deck, right? I'm just bringing this card up. Certainly, again, it goes in colorless decks, obviously. In a monocolor deck, it's likely you have a lot of colorless options for doing stuff, just like a Wayfarer's Bauble, right? I need to go get a land. This guy will copy it. Maybe I got that sad robot. I can copy the ETB. That's a triggered ability. Get another land. I can copy the dies trigger. Get another card draw, right? So you might be surprised if you look at your decks that this guy actually will help you out quite a bit, even if you're not in a colorless deck. Let's talk about Spectre of Mortality. 3 black, Spectre 3/3 with flying. When Spectre of Mortality enters the battlefield, you may exile 1 or more creature cards from your graveyard. When you do, each other creature gets -6/-6 until end of turn, where X is the number of cards exiled this way. That's pretty good. I actually am pretty shocked that I missed this card. I love creatures that have great ETBs for a variety of reasons. You can reuse them. The big one here, and it's really difficult to find a board wipe type of effect on a creature as an ETB like this. This is actually very rare. Now, you have to exile 1 or more creature cards from your graveyard, and what people might not like about this is, okay, well, I'm playing a black deck, and I probably have recursion, and I don't want to exile stuff from my graveyard. What I like about that is, just like with a Toxic Deluge, I can very easily control the number here, right? I can control it so that my commander has a 4 toughness. Well, now I'm only going to exile 3 creature cards from my graveyard, give everything else -3/-3, and I get to keep my commander, right? That's what I like about it. Yes, it can be difficult if I have to get every creature off the battlefield. If my opponent has a Blightsteel Colossus, maybe I don't have enough creatures in my graveyard to be able to do that. Sure. However, I think it's worth it. I think the risk of maybe I can't get every creature off the battlefield is worth the advantage that you will get out of maybe my opponent just has a ton of 1/1s in play and I can just exile 1 creature and wipe those all out, right? There are a lot of scenarios like that. This is a really neat creature that could probably go in a lot of decks. I have already talked about Zoes Justice briefly in a video. about taking cards out of my deck, actually, and I'm revisiting it here. So 1 in a red instant, the owner of target artifact or creature with mana value 1 or greater shuffles it into their library. Then that player discovers X, where X is the mana value. And the card I was taking out of my decks was a Braid. I'm not really playing that card at all anymore, I don't think. Zoes Justice is likely a strict upgrade. It deals with more stuff, which is what I like about it. I wasn't really blown away by this card when I first saw it, because red already deals with creatures and artifacts fairly well. Although I will say, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, when I did my what's the best color in Commander video, I was thinking, actually, does red deal with creatures really, really well? It doesn't deal with big creatures very well, right? How many red cards can just get a big, beefy creature off the table? Not a lot. If that creature has a bigger than 13 toughness, even Blasphemous Act won't do, right? This will, though. Assuming its mana value is 1 or greater, which I think if it's that big, likely, I guess a Merit Lage token would be the one exception. This is not going to get that off the table, but everything else is going to get off the table, right? That Blightsteel Colossus, it gets around indestructible. That's a big part of this as well. This, to me, is just a strict upgrade to an Abrade in pretty much every scenario, right? It gets around indestructible. It also gets a creature with a bigger than 3 toughness off the battlefield as well. Pretty great removal option in red, in my opinion. Another great removal option that I sort of skipped over, mostly because black does have a lot of fantastic targeted removal spells now, specifically for creatures and planeswalkers, but this is a pretty darn good one. Pylon, 3 in a black instant, has Convoke, destroy target creature or planeswalker, and Surveil 2. So why are you going to put this in your deck over some other options, right? Like maybe Baleful Mastery is a pretty good one that you definitely could use, and I do. There's a bunch. Poison the Cup is one that I was really high on when Kaldheim came out, and I don't think I'm playing that at all anymore because there's just so many better options. This is definitely a better option. I would put this in my deck over Poison the Cup for a couple of reasons. The Surveil 2 can be very relevant. It also hits planeswalkers as well, which can be very relevant. But it's another removal spell that has Convoke, which means it can be free. Talked about this with Lethal Scheme. One of my favorite removal spells in the entire format now, and Pylon is very, very similar. It is a possibly free removal spell, which can be really, really important. Again, in that instance of just right now, I got to kill something, right? My opponent just did this big scary thing, cast a Vorinclex, and of course, I don't want to have to tap my lands down to kill the Vorinclex because then my lands won't untap on my turn. This is a possible way to get around that, right? There are a lot of situations like that, or I just happen to be tapped out and I can't cast any removal until my next turn, and I got to do it right now. That's why I really like the Convoke on here, and the Surveil 2 is pretty nice as well. Troublemaker Oaf, 1 in a green, Oaf 2/2, has the bargain ability. You may sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token as you cast this spell. When Troublemaker Oaf enters the battlefield, if it was bargained, exile target artifact or enchantment opponent controls. And again, kind of weird that I missed this one. I really like those ETB creatures, especially when they have removal options on them. And this is a pretty good one. Exiling an artifact or enchantment, pretty fantastic. How hard is it to get the bargain ability? I ended up putting this in a deck myself. That's why I'm mentioning it. And I didn't find it very difficult at all. I know green has other options for dealing with artifacts and enchantments where you don't have to sacrifice something of yours, but it is an exile, which is a little more rare in green. It's stapled on a creature. There's a whole lot of decks out there that, particularly in the token theme, right? If you're in a green deck where you're just cranking out lots of tokens of any kind, it's probably very easy for you to sacrifice a token to that bargain ability. So might want to give this one consideration. All right, and lastly, Collector's Vault, another card from Wilds of Eldraine. I think I got about 4 of them on this list. 2 mana artifact, pay 2, tap, draw a card, then discard a card, create a treasure token. So a lot of people are like, wow, you didn't talk about this? No, I know a lot of people are probably using this already. It is a decent draw option. It is not a card that I would just throw in any deck as a draw option. It's looting. I know it's creating a treasure token, and people love any card that is creating a treasure token. Just creating a 1 treasure token for 2 mana, though, that doesn't seem very good to me. The looting is nice, okay? However, for me, and the reason I'm mentioning this card again, is because I put in a deck myself. I put it in my Benny Brax deck. And of course, it's good there because the token creation, right? The treasure token's nice, but I get a card draw off my commander. That's why I put it in there. I wanted a card that more specifically, I could create a token on my opponent's turn, because getting the card draw on my turn is very easy in that deck. I'm never going to do this on my turn. I'm going to do it on my opponent's turn, so I can create that treasure token on their turn. Then this becomes, with my commander, draw 2 cards and discard a card, which is pretty darn good. Also, I could put this in my Bralin deck because that is a discard theme. I haven't. I could, though. It's pretty good there as well because, again, the benefit of discarding a card. There, I want to be discarding cards, right? I don't see this as a super value-y, great draw engine or treasure token maker, nothing like that. For me, I like this as a slot into any deck where you want to be discarding. Maybe you want to be throwing stuff in your graveyard, a reanimator strategy, or in like my Benny Brax deck. I don't know how many other commanders there are like that where I want to be creating tokens. Or, you know, again, maybe I could put it in my Lulu deck because that's like kind of a treasure token theme. Probably wouldn't find room for it there, but a treasure token theme as well. You might want to find room for it because it is doing several different things. It does fit in a few different strategies for sure. Definitely a decent card in the Commander format. That is it. That is all. 10 cards that I missed from last year, and I guess one from this year, that have gotten a lot more attention from me because I've been putting them in my decks, and you guys as well might want to consider putting them in your decks. You let me know what you think of these cards. Likely, a lot of these are already being used by you guys. Let me know in the comments below. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.